In a message to doctors that was shared with the Times, Heidi actually wrote, quote, "In our world, it's like a PR nightmare," referring to tensions in her family about the gender treatment. The message did not mention anything about suing the clinic. To the contrary, it said, quote, "We don't regret any decision." It's just knowing liars. Literally, I'm the New York Times. We got two sides to this issue, and it's both sides of the political conversation here. We got the one side that wants to ban all trans care and eradicate trans people from public life, and on the other side, we're following reality and scientific and medical consensus and want to expand care so that it provides better outcomes for people. And we're gonna write an article that seems to provide cover for people on the right who want to ban all trans care. And then later on, we're gonna literally just cite two knowing liars who we debunk in our own f***ing article about it. What was the point of writing this article? There was no point. There was nothing. Do you remember some time ago, 5 months to be more precise ago, that we did this video on this so-called whistleblower who came out from a gender clinic in Missouri, which is a real state somehow, right? It's St. Louis, Missouri. And she was thoroughly debunked, by the way. She came out talking all kind of shit, and the parents that had children in this clinic completely contradicted all of her claims to the point where she's a fucking laughingstock. At least she should be, if our media actually had any kind of, worth or strength or actual care for delivering the truth and shining a light on bad behavior and all, but they don't, and they won't. There are some good out there, I assume. Some are good people. A lot of these journos and journalistic outlets, pretty bad on trans issues, it would turn out. And I would imagine on a variety of others. A lot of these people have some crazy shit to say when it comes to police brutality because a lot of news orgs, especially local news, are very pro-police and will literally just copy police reports without actually investigating any further than that, and we know that police lie all the time. We've got a new article that came out from Nazin Goriashi, August 23rd, 2023, which was 7 days ago. How a small gender clinic landed in a political storm. Washington University's youth gender clinic in St. Louis, like others around the world, was overwhelmed by new patients and struggled to provide them with mental health care. And somehow we're going to paint this, as we'll see in this really bad article, as an indictment of the care providers for a labor shortage, which is not really entirely their fault, in the midst of an entire anti-trans storm with a bunch of pseudoscience being thrown around. We'll get to that. The small Midwestern gender clinic was buckling under an unrelenting surge in demand. I agree that that's a problem. Last year, dozens of young patients were seeking appointments every month, far too many for the clinic's 2 psychologists to screen. Doctors in the emergency room downstairs raised alarms about transgender teenagers arriving every day in crisis, taking hormones but not getting therapy. Opened in 2017 inside a children's hospital affiliated with Washington University in St. Louis, the prestigious clinic was welcomed by many families as a godsend. It was the only place for hundreds of miles where distressed adolescents could see a team of experts to help them transition to a different gender. So that is the problem we're diagnosing here. Now, the reasons for why we come to this diagnosis and the things we should do about said diagnosis may differ between myself and the New York Times or the people writing and editing at the New York Times. Because in my view, if it is the case that there is a doctor shortage at a specific location, and if it's the case that it seems to be that a lot of doctors aren't even trained in gender-affirming care because it's a very small minority of people that need access to it, but they should still be trained on it. Also, a bunch of transphobia in the past has made people hesitant to investigate it and do studies on it. One of the most prominent people who had done studies on it was a man in Germany named Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld. He was a Jewish gay man, and his clinic, the German Institute for Sexual Health, was raided by the Nazis, and all of the books and research that was within were burned in some of the first book burnings. Isn't that so crazy? So doctors who may want to help people who are dealing with gender dysphoria or related things where gender-affirming care could be helpful, they might not be very interested in a climate and a culture in their society to actually do that research and do that study, and potentially even specialized in trans care, if they're aware that they'll get posted on libs at TikTok about it, and then suddenly the clinic they work at is subject to bomb threats and threats of terroristic violence on the phone. That might stop people from wanting to do that kind of thing. A similar thing could be said about abortion care and the people who perform abortions, and frankly, the people who even coordinate people getting the care of an abortion, or frankly, even the people who coordinate care that isn't abortion but other family planning, like access to contraception and STI screenings like Planned Parenthood. They also get subject to terroristic threats They get firebombed. Like, fucking Bill O'Reilly called him Tiller the baby killer a billion times on his popular news program, and then eventually someone went out and fucking killed the guy for just providing abortions to people, a regular medical service. We've seen this culture of right-wingers politicizing medicine, and then it leading to violence from those right-wingers because of that rhetoric and inflaming of tensions. So a lot of people are likely to be hesitant because of that, right? And also, you know, there's a lot of people out there who would rather go into other fields because they might be better paying. If you have a system where you need to pay through the nose to get a good degree, and then you have to work to pay it off because you need to get your student loans to do it, well, then people are probably going to like go into fields or specialize in things where they know they can make a return on that investment, where there shouldn't be any need for that kind of calculation. You should be able to go into whatever you want without that penalty because it should be subsidized by the state. We have the money to do it. We just decide not to. Anyway, it's just a tangent that, you know, surely means nothing in the grand scheme of things, and I'm not completely correct on literally everything that I've said on this in the past and leading up to the chickens coming home to roost about it, and I'm not even particularly smart either, but apparently I can see it, and the writers at the New York Times, with all their investigative might and journalistic infrastructure, can't seem to get a handle on. So I don't know. Maybe I am smarter than I think. As the number of these patients soared, the clinic became overwhelmed and soon found itself in the center of a political storm. That political storm, not the fault of anybody but the far-right lunatics who disagree with medical science and sociological study and instead politicize it for their own political gain and financial gain. In February, Jamie Reed, a former case manager, went public with explosive allegations claiming in a whistleblower complaint that has been thoroughly debunked since by multiple experts in the field and the own parents of the kids who had their kids in this fucking clinic, that doctors at the clinic had hastily prescribed hormones with lasting effects to adolescents with pressing psychiatric problems. Those pressing psychiatric problems, however, are not unique to trans people, but are often going along with it. But obviously, non-trans people can suffer from a lot of this kind of stuff as well, or things tangentially related to it. Ms. Reed's claims thrust the clinic between warring factions. The warring factions, of course, because the New York Times has to kind of both sides enlighten centrist this, was on the one hand, on the left, the people on the side of reality and science, medical and sociological study are agreeing with the medical consensus and scientific consensus on the issue when it comes to the treatment of gender dysphoria and other reasons why somebody would want to attain gender-affirming care as a youth and also as an adult, and that's that side. And on the right, it's a bunch of people who are using right-wing ideologues with political projects who are politicizing medicine, do not have any actual studies to back up their claims, and are using it for political points to get votes and also to fundraise, and are leading to a climate of violence against the LGBTQIA+ people, not just trans people, but gay people and whatnot as well, and also leading to a variety of legislation banning care, which is contradictory to the standards of care and the consensus on the issue. Those are the two warring sides here. And obviously, they're both equal, and we have to talk about them as if they are, and not talk about the one side that is literally counterfactual and against reality as being fucking batshit lunatics who are literally only doing it for political and financial gain. Of course, because this is the New York Times, the so-called liberal journalistic outlet. Missouri's Attorney General, a Republican, opened an investigation, and lawmakers in Missouri and other states trumpeted her allegations when they passed a slew of bans on gender treatments for minors. By the way, Jamie Reed, the so-called whistleblower, like I said, has been thoroughly debunked by the parents of the children, and the institutions involved. But all these bans still went through with that as the precedent. So when we engage with this as a journalistic outlet, we have to be really fucking irresponsible with how we talk about it and frame it. LGBTQ advocates have pointed to parents who disrupted her account in local news reports and to a Washington University investigation that determined her claims are unsubstantiated, but it doesn't fucking matter because the laws are on the books now. The reality was more complex than what was portrayed by either side of the political battle. You know, the one side with all the facts and science on their side, and the other side that just has feelings and a need for power no matter the cost. According to interviews with dozens of patients, parents, former employees, and local health providers, as well as more than 300 pages of documents shared by Ms. Reed. Some of Ms. Reed's claims could not be confirmed. Some is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. If you go and watch my original video on this topic, some is not the word I would use. And at least one included factual inaccuracies. But others were corroborated, offering a rare glimpse into one of the 100 or so clinics in the United States that have been at the center of an intensifying fight over transgender rights. The fight that doesn't have to exist, but only does because of the far right and right-wing conservatives. So, what is likely to be the case, I skimmed through this article, what is likely to be the case and what we see of the so-called corroborated accounts from Miss Reed are going to be like staffing shortages, which is not a unique problem to this specific gender clinic. or a unique problem in the healthcare field in general. And it is not a problem of the actual science behind transgender care and would not be a worthwhile justification for the banning of said care. The actual thing that you would take from that, of that labor shortage, would be, okay, we need to find a way to expand study into trans healthcare. We need to find a way to expand education of doctors into trans healthcare. We need to find a way to get more of these doctors at a point where they can actually work at such a location, and then there would no longer be a shortage of said doctors. That would be the solution to the problem. However, the one side of the warring factions has just decided to ban it against medical consensus, which studies have shown actually leads to more child abuse and also leads to more unfortunate youth suicidality and all these kinds of negative aspects. Whereas studies to the contrary have shown that gender-affirming care and positive and affirming social situations outside of anything medical actually helps trans people and gender nonconforming people and, gay people, especially as youth, but even as adults, not be as depressed, not be as suicidal, etc., etc. So contrary to all that available evidence, we have done the opposite because of Miss Reed's claims, a lot of which have been debunked, and most of it that isn't debunked is like labor shortage type shit, which is, like I say, a dog shit justification for the banning of care. In fact, that would be a justification for the expansion of care, not the limiting of it. But what do I know? I'm just a dipshit YouTube, Twitch live streamer, YouTube upload videoer, and I don't have the full weight and financial capacity of the New York Times investigative infrastructure and journalistic outlet to be able to come to these conclusions looking at the evidence. So what do I know? The turmoil in St. Louis underscores one of the most challenging questions in gender care for young people today. How much psychological screening should adolescents receive before they begin gender treatments? One would hope it would be actually accessible. The unfortunate consequence of the capitalist system that our pharmaceutical and medical structure in our country follows is that all of this shit is paywalled, brother. Who the fuck has the money to go see a regular therapist, much less people who are historically marginalized and therefore less likely to be doing good financially? But of course, the New York Times, they're capitalists, so they don't have that kind of analysis to kind of understand that getting a lot of this psychiatric care might be cost prohibitive for a lot of people. We need to fix that. That's not a problem of trans people. That is not a justification for the banning of care. It is a justification for the expansion of care and for undoing our dog shit for-profit healthcare system in lieu of one that utilizes taxpayer dollars derived from the wealthiest people in this country while leaving them fairly wealthy to be able to pay for it like other nations have been able to figure out how to do. Nations with less money, with less power, with less cultural influence have been able to figure out. Once again, we spend more for our healthcare in the United States of America for worse outcomes. That is a fact. Shaped by ideas pioneered in Europe, oh boy, from Turf Island in the UK, bruv, these clinics have opened over the past decade to serve the growing number of young people seeking hormonal medications to transition. Many patients and parents told the New York Times that the St. Louis team provided essential care helping adolescents feel comfortable in their bodies for the first time. Some patients said they were lifted out of grave depression, but we have to ban all of that care because some people might make a mistake. But as demand rose, more patients arrived with complex mental health issues, which is not a shock for people who are going through a complex mental issue, which is not aligning with the gender they were assigned at birth. No shit. Oh, in a society where your rights are constantly under threat, you are portrayed in media as a joke, there is a violent anti-trans culture going on, and a lot of parents happen to be bigoted against those people because a lot of these bigots who are voting for Republicans are also parents, and those parents might be parents of LGBTQIA plus youth, and they will go on to abuse their kids because they're not being exactly what they want to be. Turns out that leads people to negative health outcomes, both physically and mentally. And if we were able to solve for that problem and not make it the trans people's fault or problem and not make it the gender affirming care's problem, that would be a lot better and a better solution. In fact, a more workable solution that would actually produce positive results if you actually want to see them for the patients involved. But no, we're just gonna both sides this when one side is contradicting literal reality. Whatever, man. The clinic staff often grappled with how best to help, documents show, bringing into sharp relief the tension in the field over whether some children's gender distress is the root cause of their mental health problems or possibly a transient consequence of them. With its psychologists overbooked, the clinic relied on external therapists, some with little experience in gender issues. Get them more experience. Fund education for doctors. This is not the trans people's problem. To evaluate the young patient's readiness for hormonal medications, doctors prescribe hormones to patients who had obtained such approvals, even adolescents whose medical histories raised red flags. Some of these patients later stopped identifying as transgender and received little to no support from the clinic after doing so. Expand trans healthcare. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of the same processes and things you need to go through when you detransition or realize that you're actually cisgender and not transgender are exceptionally, incredibly similar to the care you would get when you thought you were transgender. It's a lot of hormone talk. It's a lot of getting on different hormones. It's a lot of the same endocrinological shit, right? A lot of the same care is involved. If you had a mastectomy, well, then breast augmentation might be on the plate again, and you might have to get some fake bazongas, whatever. A lot of this care is very similar. So an expansion of trans care for people who are transgender would also help the people who detransition, because it is the same fucking care. It's the other side of the coin. But no, we gotta ban it all. And we gotta use detransitioners to justify that ban, even though the opposite, an expansion of the care, would literally help detransitioners. And I've talked about this before. If your problem is that people are getting so-called rushed into transitioning, and you worry that it will increase the likelihood of detransition, well, then the best way to deal with that would not be to ban the care, but rather to expand the care. If you get more education and more doctors, that allows more doctors to be available, which allows more psychiatric doctors to be available, which allows more screening to be done, which leads to a less, rate of error, if you actually want to help people. But if you have a political project where cruelty is the point and you want to see people suffer because you think they're icky and you think it's, a transgression against your religious beliefs, well, then you're going to ban it instead and write garbage fucking so-called centrist but literally just reactionary conservative bullshit like this New York Times article. You might be able to realize that I'm a little bit heated in this. I'm being a little bit, excitable and flippant. Because one, I'm very passionate about this issue because obviously it directly impacts me as a trans person, even though, I transitioned as an adult. So the youth side of that, I would likely have transitioned as a youth, or at least when I was like 18 or whatever, if I had more education on the topic. But I didn't. I grew up in a conservative area. What can you do? We're trying to fix that, get that education out there. But anyway, I'm also just mad and disappointed. I'm mad because of that disappointment that this so-called journalistic outlet is having such a difficulty talking about this issue in an actual rational and attached to reality way, and are actually providing cover for insane right-wing lunatics who contradict medical and scientific consensus, who do not live in reality and are instead trying to substitute their own warped version of reality that they like to see onto other people. That bugs me. Because that shouldn't be how our media is, but unfortunately, towing the line between being outright anti-trans and being this wishy-washy centrist but still anti-trans, but enough of a cover to not really look like it, gets you clicks, which gets you, more money. And yeah, it is true, Forlorn, that detransitioning or transition regret is exceptionally low. The reason why studies have shown people usually detransition is not because they realize they're actually cisgender and not trans, but rather because of lack of financial access to the healthcare, because of a negative social stigma within the home and within their communities. That's why. So you can solve those problems. The first one, by decoupling these parasitic fucking for-profit entities from our healthcare system and making it a social healthcare system, like every other industrialized nation has been able to figure out while paying less for better outcomes than we do. And also change culture so that people are less bigoted against queer people and more accepting. Bada bing, bada boom. You've solved both of those issues and you didn't have to ban care to do it. And then you have less detransitioners because those people aren't actually really not trans. They're detransitioning by factors outside of their control. So if we could fix those factors, it is less likely that they would detransition. Now, this is not to say that there aren't going to be people who find out that they're cis later on in life and have to go through a detransition process. The thing is, as a person on the left and as pro-trans rights, as I am, I actually give a shit about detransition people going through a retransition back to being cisgender. I actually fucking care about them and want them to get the care that they need to live the most fulfilling life that they can, because why wouldn't I? It's literally the other side of the coin to trans care. And the things that I support would actually be helpful in getting to that. People on the right don't care about detransition people. They only care about them so much as they can use them as a political weapon in order to score points and ban care for people, because they think it's a good way to raise money, and apparently they thought it's a good way to win elections, when it turns out that actually seems to be the opposite, which is why the most recent Republican debate didn't really talk about it that much. They've gone back to, the illegals and the Mexicans and the Chinese instead, because that's their bread and butter, and it's a lot easier to, hit people over the head with, and there's been a longer project of demonizing those people. But that shit is also fucking insane and should be changed. Some people would rather make their parents happy than themselves when it comes to like bigoted parents and a trans kid. Well, it's not just that. There might be some people who are that in that way, but also a lot of kids are worried about their safety. It's not necessarily making their parents happy by detransitioning or not being trans or like hiding or being closeted about the fact that they're trans or queer or whatever, but they're worried about being victims of child abuse or abuse if they're an adult but still living in the home. It's not so much that, kids want to make their parents happy. It's that they don't want to be victims of abuse. So they just stay closeted and go along to get along until they can move out and never talk to their parents again. Which sucks for all parties involved, because ideally these family units would be able to stay intact and be loving and wholesome and beneficial to everybody. Because that's the ideal of the family, is it not? Anyway, there's a lot going on here when it comes to like the history of this clinic. And what's unfortunate about that is that that's not really as relevant if you're going to frontline this article with Jamie Reed. Because she is a known liar. She has been debunked 1,000 times. Her claims are not worth dog shit. But you've got her as the cover and headline of your article on the topic, and you only start talking about her in a serious way about her claims and about how they've been debunked by the parents all the way down here in the article and even further down, which is why this is such an irresponsible article. In the United States, health groups have endorsed what's known as affirming care, even as their peers in Europe have grown more cautious. By the way, it's a lot of political will that is pushing that and not really an adherence to any kind of medical or sociological study, by the way. In fact, it's worse over there, or at least it was for a while, and now the United States has realized that they need to be number one in something else, in this case, the oppression of queer people. And conservative lawmakers in more than 20 states have taken the draconian step of banning or severely restricting gender treatments for minors. I'm glad they say that it's draconian, but it doesn't really mean anything if you're willing to try to play both sides on the issue. Like, if you're literally admitting that your understanding of the issue is that the people on the conservative side, especially the people with the most power, the lawmakers, are doing draconian shit, aka shit that is not suitable to civilized modern society, how the fuck can you both sides that to the pro-trans side? To the pro-reality side? It doesn't make any sense. This seems like an admission of some kind of an agenda. It's not consistent with what they've already said. Civil rights groups are challenging the Missouri ban in a hearing this week, and Ms. Reed testified on Tuesday in favor of it, describing her allegations in detail. Washington University created an oversight committee to carry out weekly reviews of the gender clinic's operations. The school's investigation claimed that none of the clinic's 598 patients on hormonal medications reported, quote, adverse physical reactions, which is contradictory to some of the claims that Jamie Reed made. But of course, we gotta focus on one worker and maybe a couple, other, friends of that worker who was literally just a case manager and didn't actually administer the care, just, routed people to the people who administered the care. We got to focus on her allegations and anecdotes rather than studies like this. And we got to front her in the article rather than studies like this, right? Like, why is this showing up not in the sentence after they mention Jamie Reed? Why do you have to get this far down into the article, far enough down that the average person isn't going to actually read it? They'll probably just read the headline and maybe the first paragraph. It's almost like they want to pretend like they're not anti-trans, but they actually are. And they're trying to provide cover and throw a smokescreen up for the right, who is vociferously and violently anti-trans. In a statement to the Times, University said that it would not address specific allegations because of patient privacy and that, quote, physicians and staff had treated patients according to the existing standard of care, which, by the way, has been agreed upon by every major medical association that deals in this field of medicine. But doctors in St. Louis and elsewhere are wrestling with evolving standards and uncertain scientific evidence, all while facing intense political pressure and an adolescent mental health crisis. Where is that intense political pressure coming from, by the way? Well, on the one hand, the pressure on the left is, can we follow the standards of care and the medical and scientific consensus on the issue and actually live in reality and administer care on the basis of that? And on the right, it's, we don't want trans people to exist, and we don't think their care should be allowed, and we're actually going to legislate bans into law. But, it's just this nebulous, intense political pressure, of course. It's truly not coming just from the right. That can't be the case. It's surely not the case that the entire reason why this article even exists and why this discourse and this issue even exists in a political frame is because of the right-wing and conservative party in this country manufacturing it to become that. And absent that manufacture and absent the existence of any political power in that party, it would not be an issue anybody cared about, and it wasn't an issue anybody cared about 5 years ago. They made you care about it because they needed new shiny keys to dangle in front of your face, while they cut taxes for the wealthy, deregulated multinational corporations, union busted, and forced you to work for longer hours for less pay and worse conditions. Good job. America's first youth gender clinic opened in Boston in 2007 after two clinicians, Dr. Norman Spack, an endocrinologist, and Laura Edwards-Leeper, a child psychologist, traveled to the Netherlands to observe a promising treatment for children with gender distress known as dysphoria. This was back in 2007. The first youth gender center opened in Boston. That's 2007, man. That's right before Obama was elected. Obama. Barack Hussein Obama. That's when George Bush was still president. That's how close to our current year, 2023, all this shit is. It shouldn't be a newer field of medical study, and it wouldn't have to be if the primary opposition to the study of sexuality and gender identity wasn't the literal fucking Nazis in Nazi Germany who literally committed killings to the people that were in the Institute for Sexual Health in Germany, which was led by a gay Jewish man, and part of their anti-Jewish plot to get rid of Jewish people and the so-called degenerates in their society. It's almost like, if not for the absence of all those medical studies and books that were burned on the study of gender identity and sexuality, we might be a little bit further along in our study here, and the first care center wouldn't have opened in 2007, and we wouldn't have a shortage of doctors with knowledge on the issue because they would be educated on it. So it's almost like all this anti-trans shit, like gender-affirming care bans, like the violent rhetoric that's pushed on the right, it's almost like all of this shit is conducive to stopping the administration of trans healthcare and gender-affirming care, and also conducive to stopping even the study into gender-affirming care, any kind of gender study or study of sexuality. Because that's literally the fucking point, brother. I don't know how you can't see that at this point. That's literally the point. That's what they wanted to do. Transgender children have high rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide attempts, and god damn it, is it investigative journalism's God-given duty to endanger their lives, increase those rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide attempts as much as possible with dogshit articles like this. The Dutch found that for a specific group, adolescents with no severe psychiatric disorders who had experienced gender dysphoria since early childhood, their depression lessened after taking puberty blockers. These are the things that the right wants to ban regardless of if they are actually effective, and studies have shown that they have been effective in reducing depression and suicidality in youth. When Dr. Spack and Dr. Edwards-Leeper opened the Boston clinic, they hewed closely to the Dutch approach. In its first 5 years, the clinic treated just 70 patients. It's a very rare thing. Some of the most minority of minorities, right? Black and brown trans people are literally some of the most marginalized minority possible, which is why the right is hyper-focusing on trans people, because there's less people to fight on behalf of them. Similar clinics opened around the country, diverging over time from the strict Dutch protocols into an affirming approach that prioritized the child's inner sense of gender. It was unethical, some argued, to deny care to children with psychiatric problems when gender treatments could help resolve those issues. In 2012, parents in St. Louis began lobbying leaders of their children's hospital to set up an affirming clinic. The parents invited Dr. Spack to town to talk about his experience in Boston. Quote, in Missouri, there were no knowledgeable doctors on the subject. We can change that by, increasing education for doctors and also lessening the burden that the consumer, that the patient has when it comes to our healthcare system, and also lessening the burden on people getting doctoral degrees by not making it a pay-to-win system through student loans, said Kim Hutton, a founder of the group called Transparent. Quote, it was left to the parents to try to figure it out. That would be fixed if we fix the labor shortage and everything I've just said. The clinic opened in 2017, led by Dr. Christopher Lewis, a pediatric endocrinologist, and Dr. Sarah Garwood, an adolescent medicine specialist who had each attended parent meetings. When Miss Reed arrived in 2018, she was the clinic's only full-time employee. She was a case manager. She didn't actually administer care. She just did book work. Eventually, the clinic would have about 9 staff members, most part-time. Their patients were part of a striking generational change. Between 2017 and 2020, about 1.4% of 13 to 17-year-olds in the United States identified as transgender, nearly double the rate from a few years earlier. This is the left hand in this graph. It turns out that the further into the modern day that we've gotten, the less stigma there's been around gay people existing, to the point where they achieved the right to be gay married. Huzzah! Obama legalized gay through the Supreme Court in 2015. Great work, everybody. Now, of course, that could be potentially on the chopping block if the composition of the Supreme Court remains as activist conservative as it is currently. But for now, they've got that right. And over time, culture has been like, oh, well, the gay people, they just love the people. It is what it is. So what can I do? Forget about it. Hey, I'm fucking walking here. What do I gotta fucking worry about? What do you get excited for about these these gay people, these homosexuals? They would probably say the F slur. I would too, but I can't on this platform. They don't fucking care anymore. Now, there are people who are still bigoted, and there are people who are, like, okay with gay people existing as long as it's not their family, which is still a form of bigotry, obviously, and not good. But there has been a marked change in acceptance for queer people, and that has included a variety of other people, like intersex people, like asexual people, like aromantic people, like polyamorous people, though that one's a little bit further off, I think. And then now, finally, trans people, which have always existed and have existed in ancient civilizations as well as more historic and closer to our modern context examples. So if the conditions in a society leads to people being more comfortable about the fact that they are queer in whatever capacity, have more education because the education and the study is no longer stigmatized, and now they understand more about what it means to be that, even if to be queer, even if they are not, it then leads people to be more accepting of those minority groups. And it also leads people to understand if they are a part of that minority group, whereas a lack of education would make it so that they might find out, I don't know, at the age of like 24 like I did. Whereas I likely would have known a lot earlier, and there are a lot of signal markers that I could find out about in my past that would have led me to that conclusion should I had the education. And then it turns out that over time, because of that, more people are comfortable with being out about it, talking about it, being proud of it, talking to their parents about it, talking to their friends about it, talking to their community members about it, because they have less of a fear of negative social pushback. That's the entire point of the right-wing project, to have that negative social pushback, right? If you make it so that, say, interracial relationships and interracial marriage would lead you to getting ostracized from your community and potentially abused by your community or even your parents, well, then you make it less likely that those people get into interracial relationships because they don't want to deal with that shit. Much the same way that if a person is homosexual and they understand that the community around them would be negative to them and potentially abusive to them, and it would lower their quality of life and increase their likelihood of negative mental health outcomes, well, then they're less likely to come out and more likely to stay in the closet, and that is precisely what the point of it is. They make the social stigma so bad that people just stay in the closet. They're not out about it. That's why you see more of them now, because they're just more visible now, because there's less social stigma and pushback now for being openly queer than there was in the past. That's why this number increases. That's literally it. And why I mentioned the left-handedness graph. It used to be a social faux pas to be left-handed, and your hand would get smacked with a fucking ruler if you were writing with your left hand and you were forced to write with your right hand. Eventually, that fucking insane lunatic idea went away, and now it turns out the rate of people who say they're left-handed increases and then plateaus because it's no longer a thing you're going to get your fucking knuckles smacked with, for being. So if we stop smacking the knuckles of queer people, it turns out more of them are going to be happy and proud and comfortable enough and feel safe enough to come out. This really shouldn't be hard to grasp. It's clear the St. Louis Clinic benefited many adolescents. Thank God we get to this. So it's clear that it actually benefited many adolescents, but we'll only get to it almost halfway through the article. But just wait for the but that follows this. It's not a good one. 18 patients and parents said that their experiences there were overwhelmingly positive, and they refuted Miss Reed's depiction of it. So you notice how earlier on in the article, where people are already less likely to have actually read this far, they briefly touched on that a literal university study of 598 patients contradicted Miss Reed's claims, and also a lot of the parents did, but they barely touched on it. Well, now they're actually going to talk about it, but far enough into the article where no fucking person is actually going to read this, should they care enough or even have the time to, which is why you watch my video on it. For example, her affidavit claimed that the clinic's doctors did not inform parents or children of the serious side effects of puberty blockers and hormones. This is a very common political talking point from the right, the so-called rushed care. Once again, if you're worried about people getting rushed into care, expand the care. Educate more doctors, expand the amount of doctors in the clinic, and then suddenly there are more people to process the patients, and suddenly there's less people potentially falling and slipping through the cracks. You don't gotta ban it. So her affidavit claimed that the clinic's doctors did not inform parents or children of the serious side effects of puberty blockers and hormones, but emails show that Miss Reed herself provided parents with those flyers outlining possible risks. The so-called whistleblower that we're holding up here in our both sides centrism is a literal liar and has literally done the thing that she is claiming is justification for legal action to be brought against the clinic that she used to work at. How do you look at this person with any fucking credence at all? With any kind of seriousness at all? This is clearly not a serious actor. What was she, in a fugue state? At that time, she forgore You know, she's just a small bean. You know, it happens to everyone. Oh, whoopsie. You're gonna make a political project over this shit, over some shit you forgot about? It's obviously politically motivated, and she is, in my opinion, clearly doing it for some kind of gain, likely financial. Now, of course, that's just speculation on my part. But if you're going to go so far as to literally just lie, provably, about something as simple as, oh, this clinic didn't inform parents or children about the serious side effects of puberty blockers and hormones, which I should mention again is literally one of the major talking points of the conservative right-wing Republican Party that wants to ban this care and has in a variety of states, how can you actually be a serious person who actually has actual concerns and not a political actor? I do not know. Miss Hutton's son, who requested anonymity because of privacy concerns, and good for them that they did, because trans people and trans-affirming parents and even trans-affirming doctors are subject to a lot of abuse from people making terroristic threats and phone calls like we saw with Boston Children's Hospital, etc., after getting posted on right-wing social media shit and lied about, is now in college and said he was grateful he transitioned years earlier. Quote, I have normal people problems, which is all that I ever wanted, he said. Not to say that I wanted to be some special unicorn snowflake because I'm trans, but rather I wanted to get myself to a point through that gender-affirming care where I could just be a normal person, which would be identifying and being perceived in society the way that you want to. Bada bing, bada boom. Simple as. Not really much to think about there. Oh, this person who's not hurting anybody or themselves wants to be the person they want to be and be seen in society as they want to be, and they don't want to be subject to all kind of social stigma and abuse over it? What a weirdo. Another patient, Chris, now 19, who also requested anonymity, recalled Dr. Lewis patiently drawing diagrams on the paper sheet of his exam chair, explaining how testosterone would redistribute his body fat and permanently deepen his voice. Chris felt, quote, drastically improved after taking the hormone, he said, but was still distressed by his breasts. At 17, he went to a surgeon in Ohio for a mastectomy. So you notice how all of these claims from Miss Reed are being contradicted by the people who are actually there being administered the care? And by the people who administered the care, and not some fucking bookkeeper who literally led people to the people who actually know what the fuck they're talking about and administer said care. But no, we gotta headline it, we gotta front it with this image of her looking very solemn and introspective and determined, and talk about how the gender clinic landed in a political storm, both siding as if there's any fucking fault to the people on the side of reality on the left, who are going along with the standards of care that all medical and scientific associations have agreed upon for the treatment of gender dysphoric youth and trans people generally. Fucking dumb. New York Times. Like, you're not hiding your political agenda that well. I'm sorry. I know you're trying. It's just not good enough. I'm a fucking dipshit YouTuber and I can sniff this shit out. Come on. You gotta try a little bit harder. These dog whistles are not working. And Becky Hormuth, a teacher in St. Charles, Missouri, praised the center's doctors for their approach to her son's mental health. The doctors diagnosed her 15-year-old with autism, she said, and connected him with a dietitian to help treat his eating disorder before prescribing testosterone. Now, at 16, her son is, quote, better than he's ever been, Ms. Hormuth said. Thank God. Turns out, all this care is helping a lot of people. Now, it's also possible that some of this care will go to people who understand themselves later on to actually be cisgender, but hopefully that would be why we would expand the care to allow for people to go through a more rigorous process that still allows people to get their care without any kind of really strict gatekeeping that is unnecessary in a lot of ways that people want to do. And then they wouldn't have these mistakes happen because they would know that they weren't actually trans at the time. And if it becomes the case that they thought they were trans, but it turns out that they're cis later on after getting all this care, well, then an expansion of care helps them detransition, whereas banning it does not. A family therapist in St. Louis, Katie Hayden-Roots, said she had worked with or supervised the counseling of roughly 30 of the clinic's patients and had never seen problems with their care. Wow! So a therapist, who's actually worked with and supervising patients at the clinic, is contradicting the claims of the person who was literally just a bookkeeper. Imagine my shock. And here is like the pièce de résistance for this fucking article, and what I've been talking about this entire time. Quote, the biggest complaint I heard about the clinic was, quote, we can't get in, Dr. Hayden-Roots said. So not that, oh my God, we're getting rushed through and we're not being told the risks or whatever, because that's already been contradicted. But it's that not enough people could actually get their foot in the fucking door. Likely, one, because of the protocols at play to try to do these overviews for people, but also because of a lack of labor, a lack of doctors who are educated on it and can work there. You fix those problems, you fix the biggest complaint that these patients are having. Not the complaint that some bookkeeper has with a political agenda. I guess I should just read the whole fucking... It's a long article for literally no reason, because a lot of this shit is completely bullshit information anyway. But it feels likely there's going to be something in here that I want to look at. the red flag list. So this is something that I think, if my memory is correct, and I could be incorrect, so fact check me on this. But my understanding was that Miss Reed having this red flag list, meaning she had medical records of a variety of patients at this clinic that, to my understanding, was outside of her jurisdiction and duties at the clinic, then, as I understand, allegedly shared it with a journalist, which is people smarter than me have said is a HIPAA violation, a violation of patients' rights, and a violation of the expectations and rules that doctors and medical professionals have to adhere to. So these people are not, the cleanest, smartest actors at the very least. But here we'll get a little bit of justification for why we're keeping off-record medical documents about patients for your own personal use. When Miss Reed, 43, began working at the clinic, she considered herself a fierce champion of the gender-affirming model, of course. In her previous jobs at Planned Parenthood and an HIV clinic in the foster care system, she had also supported LGBTQ young people, and her husband, a transgender man, had shown her how essential gender-affirming care could be. Miss Reed's job at the clinic was akin to that of a social worker, collecting medical histories, triaging appointments, and supporting patients in the hospital, at school, and in court. So not administering the care, not studying the science, not actually writing up the standards of care, not actually even directly interfacing with the patients past getting them to people who actually know and whose job it is to know what the fuck they're talking about. Her doubts about the affirming model arose in 2019, she said, after hearing from an upset patient who regretted their medical transition, because one upset patient is enough to ban it for everybody, of course. She grew more concerned in 2020 as more new patients sought the clinic's help, many with psychological problems exacerbated by the pandemic. The idea that these are directly correlated to a lack of that person being trans, or that people are only under the assumption they are trans because of some kind of psychological problem or mental disorder that they have, is not really a view that's been found to be holding any fruit in science or the medical literature. In fact, gender-affirming care seems to lessen psychological problems that people experience, not even just any kind of dysphoria they might experience, but a variety of other things like depression or suicidality, or potentially other benefits to other mental health problems that they might have, which are not like the only solution, but just happen to in collateral help with them. Because it turns out people's quality of life increasing after receiving this care ends up making it easier for them to tackle the other problems in their life, and also lessens the burden on them overall, which allows them to process a variety of things and seek out the solutions to these problems. She saw parallels with England's youth gender clinic known as the Tavistock Clinic, which was heavily politicized, by the way, and were complete cowards for shutting down. This is what they hoped would happen with this St. Louis clinic, but it didn't end up happening, and that is my firm belief and my opinion. They wanted Jamie Reed's case to cause this clinic to shut down, to be a W in the United States, in Missouri. Didn't happen, luckily, which was under investigation after employees complained about feeling pressure to approve children for puberty blockers as their wait list swelled. Yeah, as their wait list swelled. Likely because there's not enough doctors and not enough educated doctors. Fix the labor problem, fix any infrastructural problems. It's not a trans care problem. And that's with the NHS, by the way, which is not a perfect system. It's certainly better than the United States, at least it was for a while. I believe it still is, but the conservatives in that country, the oi bruv three heads in that country are like, it's fucking Tuesday. We've been having better health outcomes with less money, with less cost, and we don't like that because we're conservative, and conservatives, no matter where we are, just want to see people suffer, so we're just gonna make the care worse for everybody. And that's what the conservatives are doing in that country by defunding the NHS, by trying to privatize the NHS because they want to benefit the people that would benefit from that privatization, rather than benefit the actual fucking patients, which a socialized healthcare system does better than a for-profit private one. The St. Louis Center relied heavily on outside therapists to vet patients. Emails show doctors there prescribed hormones to patients who had identified as transgender for at least 6 months and had received a letter of support from a therapist and had parental consent. Look at that. Doctors there followed all the shit that right-wingers say should be happening, but claim isn't. At this clinic that we're focusing on in this article, the St. Louis Center may have relied heavily on outside therapists to vet patients. I would imagine that would be the case because of the labor shortage, because of the lack of educated doctors on a topic, because of the social stigma on studying the topic to begin with, administering the care to begin with, and being trans to begin with. If we fix all these problems, suddenly these worries that right-wingers claim to have about so-called rush care go away. And the plus side to that, for me anyway, is trans people are allowed to continue to exist in a healthy capacity. And that might be a negative for some people who claim to want to not have rushed care and claim that it's happening, but don't seem to be entirely accurate with that assessment. Frustrated that the clinic had no system to keep track of patient outcomes, which would be remedied by enfranchising more doctors and getting them more educated, Miss Reed and the clinic's nurse, Karen Hammond, kept a private spreadsheet, which they called the red flag list, quote-unquote. Miss Reed gave the Times a version of the spreadsheet without identifying information. Miss Hammond, or Hamon, is that a JoJo reference? And other clinic employees declined to comment for this article. I wonder why she doesn't want to be this political operative and participate in this spectacle. I wonder what she's up to. The list eventually included 60 adolescents with complex psychiatric diagnoses, a shifting sense of gender, or complicated family situations. One patient on testosterone stopped taking schizophrenia medication without consulting a doctor. Are we going to provide any more information about that, or are we just going to make it so that people reading this assume that they stopped taking schizophrenia medication without consulting a doctor because they got on gender-affirming care and testosterone? Because that's what this sentence leads me to believe, but I don't know if that's actually true, and frankly, I don't trust this article anymore after all the bullshit we've already seen. I would like a little bit more information on this case before taking this at face value, because it could be a correlation does not equal causation kind of problem here. Like, either way, it's a mistake, but I am highly skeptical of one potential claim where you could read this as they stopped taking it because of the testosterone. Another patient had visual and olfactory hallucinations. Do we know this is a direct result of the gender-affirming care, or are we just saying that this happened and this person happened to be on gender-affirming care? You know, there are people who have had visual and olfactory hallucinations that also happen to have drank water that day. You know, maybe we should have an investigation into this water substance. I believe the scientists call it H2O because of its molecular structure, if that even exists, and kind of see what's going on there, right? Another had been in an inpatient psychiatric unit for 5 months. Is this because of the gender-affirming care, or does this just happen to be another thing that's happening with this person? They're implying that you can't get any gender-affirming care if you have other mental problems. Well, yeah, that's the justification that the conservatives and right-wing and anti-trans people make a lot as well. That's why they try to tie autism to being trans a lot as well, right? Now, the actual reason, and a reason that I believe makes more sense for why autistic people might be more likely to be transgender or understand themselves to be trans, is not because autism makes you trans, but rather, autism tends to have you not really aligning with broader societal and cultural points of view on a topic, right? A very common thing that autistic people can experience, and obviously it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Autism can affect people differently and to varying degrees and in a variety of ways, but often it'll be the case that autistic people will have certain behaviors or ways of thinking or ways of speaking to people that seem to be atypical to a person who does not have autism. And because of that, it contradicts what society expects of that person, right? This can lead to a variety of negative mental health outcomes for that autistic person if they don't understand why they're being seen in that way, because it is likely that they wouldn't, especially earlier on when they're younger, and all this kind of stuff. And because of that, they are also going to be likely to question a variety of reasons as to why cultural influences have to be a certain way, or why these things are the way that they are, right? This is why a lot of autistic people can be very good at logic-related things, right? Not to give this kind of like romanticized and frankly harmful view of autism, like all autistic people are like savants in a specific field or whatever, because that can be the case, but it's not always. And it's not great to think of it in that way because it leads to people with autism that doesn't, affect them in that way, getting less help for it and whatnot, or being taken less seriously. But rather to say that that kind of questioning and trying to find out why things happen because you have those questions, because you don't connect with people in that way like atypical people might, like non-autistic people might, leads you to question, well, why is pink a girl's color? Why is blue a boy's color? Like, why do I get in trouble? Or why do I get weird looks if I'm a girl, but I want to play sports with the other boys? Why do I get in trouble if I'm a guy, but I want to be in gymnastics or a ballerina? Why is that the case? Because if you think of it logically speaking, there is no actual logical explanation for why those expectations are in society. There is nothing. There's no biological reason for it. There's no natural reason for it. There is no logical reason for why any of those things happen or exist. The reason why they do is because of social construction, because we made it up. My source is human society made it the fuck up, right? Just like we made up human language. It's not that, the English language existed and all these words that have definitions were found in a dictionary when dinosaurs roamed the earth before humans did, and just none of the dinosaurs around were smart enough to read it. So once humans came up and were actually capable of having society, we had written and spoken language. It's the fucking social factors, brother. It's not some fucking essentialist shit to somebody's biology. People don't pop out the pussy being like, yeah, I'm a boy and I like blue, because they're fucking infants. They don't know what that means, right? The parents decide if blue is a boy color or not, and then put blue on the boy. The baby doesn't choose to wear blue. And then later on, as that child gets older and is able to actually think for themselves and voice their own viewpoints, they might go along with liking blue because of that social expectation from their parents, from their family, from their local community, their school, etc. Or they might go on to contradict it, but if they face pushback from it, they might stop. And they might go along to get along. So this is a long-winded way to say that the reason why there are a lot of autistic people that happen to be trans as well is potentially because of the fact that they are likely to question why it is they are not allowed to be who they are in society, which would be a trans person, non-binary, trans woman, trans man, whatever. Why is it that I can't do that if, logically speaking, there is no actual justifiable argument against it? Why can't I be seen as a woman or a man, or something in between? Because of that likelihood to question things like that, not just in the case of, gender and stuff like that, but even like, why do trains work the way they do? I want to learn about trains. I want to hyper-focus on, how the steam locomotive worked and how modern bullet trains work. Like, that would lead somebody to coming to those conclusions, maybe not even for themselves, but understanding it for other people, right? Autism doesn't cause transgenderness. On a different tab, they tallied 16 patients who they knew had detransitioned, meaning they had changed their gender identity or stopped hormone treatment. So by the way, in the time that Reed had been doing this, they tallied 16 patients who detransitioned, and the University of Washington study that was conducted looked at 598 patients at this clinic who received this gender-affirming care. So, at a conservative estimate, in both directions perhaps, that's 16 people out of 598. I would say that's a pretty good success rate. I would say that's, it's not bad. Ideally, it would be a 100% success rate, but there isn't even a 100% success rate with hip replacement, because hip replacements literally have higher rates of regret than gender-affirming care does. One patient emailed the clinic in January 2020 to say they had detransitioned and were seeking a voice coach for their masculinized voice. So I assume this was a trans-masc person who understands themselves to be cis now. They likely identify as a cisgender woman or girl, so they would need feminizing vocal training in order to make their masculinized voice sound more feminine. You know who also needs that kind of feminizing vocal training? I'll let you have a guess. Any conservatives watching this far into the video, God bless you. You might be one of the good ones who's willing to at least hear out the other side. You want to know what other group of people might be interested in that feminizing vocal training? Actors and singers, of course, but also trans people, and specifically usually trans feminine people. A lot of trans femme people end up having to go through feminizing vocal training in order to sound like and be heard by people in society as the person they are, which is a more feminine person, often a person who identifies as a woman, right? So, once again, the expansion of gender-affirming care and trans-related healthcare and medical science and investigation and study would literally help the people that right-wingers claim they actually care about in this conversation, which is people who understand that they were not actually trans and understand themselves to be cis now, but have undergone treatment and have retransitioned back to being cis. They claim to care about them, but they support policies that hurt them, because the banning of care only hurts detransitioning people because it makes it less likely that they have access to what they need to be the people they want to be. They also requested a referral for an autism screening, noting, quote, I have mentioned this before at appointments and over email, but it did not seem to go anywhere. That's a L, unfortunately, on the clinic there. But this is likely a problem of a lack of staffing, like we've talked about. There are ways to fix this that isn't banning care. And the one side of this centrist-ass I can see both sides article is the complete banning of care. There is really not a lot of nuance in the Republican Party, and the nuance that does exist ends up being stripped away later on, like you see with Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh started with, what about, Leah Thomas in sports? You just can't have trans women in women's sports. And then he went on to say, what about the kids? You can't have kids getting on puberty blockers or getting on HRT after interfacing with medical and mental health professionals, their parents, themselves, in an ideal situation where this care is expanded. And then now he's on to, nobody, not even adults, should be able to transition and access this care. And he wants to ban it for literally everybody because he wants to ban it in total because he doesn't want trans people to be able to exist. That's it. That is the logical end point. Every step until then is a stepping stone. How much more of this do I need to read, really? So I can continue reading this, and I likely will, though I am suffering right now. But I've essentially gotten to the root of what I wanted to in this article, for the fact that, one, this article in the New York Times broadly seemed to have a political project And whoever in their editorial team or whoever directs what kind of articles get written and the people writing the articles themselves seem to have a reactionary at best and anti-trans at worst approach to reporting on issues related to trans people and trans healthcare, which is readily apparent not just from this article, but from a variety of others that got criticism for being dog shit, frankly. For two, Jamie Reed is not a credible source of information on the specific case at the St. Louis clinic, because in the previous video and in that St. Louis Dispatch article that I read in that video, and in this own article just halfway through it, her claims are literally directly contradicted by the actual patients and the parents of the patients and the doctors and clinicians at the clinic. And she's also been found to just be lying. So she's not a credible source at all. But the New York Times is propping her up that she might be, because there's both sides to these warring factions on this issue. And it is only harmful to trans people, and it is only helpful for the people that wish to harm trans people. Like I say, with the amount of money the New York Times has, and the amounts of people they have working there, and the journalistic infrastructure that they have, this is not an article that should be allowed to exist, unless the New York Times is literally failing. Believe me, folks, the failing New York Times. They haven't had good numbers, frankly. I would have better numbers if I was the one that was leading it, but no, they don't like Trump. Unless they're, like, literally failing and they're operating on a shoestring budget, and they're literally just doing this for clicks, because they know being anti-trans or, like, reactionary to trans issues and, like, both sides and shit is a good way to get, like, right-wing views. And they're, like, the most gullible people possible to get views and money from, so, you know, gotta go where the money is. It's either, like, that, or they have an agenda, or the people working there have an agenda. Because they have put out some fucking slop that I would be embarrassed to have on my platform if I was working at or even owned or directed things at the New York Times. But this is talking about a lot of the so-called regrets and the things in the list, so I feel like I should go through these, because this would be the counter-arguments to a lot of the shit that I've said. I don't think they're going to be sufficient counter-arguments, but whatever. In another email thread, the center staff discussed a patient who regretted a recent mastectomy. The patient had a message to their surgeon at Washington University twice about wanting a breast reconstruction, but had not received a reply. Yeah, so why is this a problem with the clinic, by the way? That's Washington University. That's UW. That's not the St. Louis gender clinic that is the focus of this so-called political battle and is having calls from the right for its shutdown. That's Washington University. That's a different place. I don't know if you knew that. That's a different place. I don't know why it's relevant to put this in, because this is about UW. This isn't about the clinic. It says the center staff discussed a patient who regretted a recent mastectomy and didn't get a response from UW, but that's not the clinic. Now, if the clinic is short-staffed, they might not have the ability to go and do the kind of coordination they need with UW to be able to try to get these things moving. But once again, that's solved by an enfranchising of more educated doctors on the topic and an expansion of care. The Times independently found another St. Louis patient who detransitioned, Alex, who posted on Reddit last year to, quote, give a warning about the clinic. Alex shared medical records with the Times to corroborate her account. Alex arrived at the center in late 2017 at age 15, he said, after identifying as transgender for 3 years. 3 years, by the way. So this is not rushed care by any means. If this person has cited that they identified as transgender for 3 years, it's not like they woke up one day and were like, well, want to chop my titties off, I'm going to go to the gender clinic and have that happen the next day. It's not what happens. It's not what ever happens. It's not what has ever happened in any, like, systemic fashion that is made out to be the case. And if should it happen, it should be penalized and there should be changes made to make the care better, not ban it. She had been referred by a therapist who was treating her for bipolar disorder and anxiety. So not only is she not fresh into understanding herself to be trans, she's been understanding herself to be trans for 3 years and identifying so, and then was referred by a therapist. So in an article that is saying that they are worried that people are getting rushed care, and they're worried that there's not enough of a psychiatric evaluation before people get care. They are citing a person who regrets their transition, which is a thing that can happen, though not nearly as much as people on the right want to make you believe. It's actually incredibly rare. A person who regrets it was literally identifying as trans for 3 years, potentially even has socially transitioned in some ways, be it using different pronouns, using a different name, wearing different clothes, speaking in a different way, all the non-medical stuff that you do that is social transition. We don't know if that's the case or not, because I don't think we'll get into it. It would be nice if we did, because that would definitely help figure out this issue. And then she also had been interfacing with a mental health professional who then gave her a referral to get this care or to investigate this care with the professionals at this clinic. That is not rushed care. In fact, that is often what people say should happen before they get this care. And that's what this article is arguing should happen before they get it. And this is what happened. But somebody still has regret, and it's incredibly rare that that happens, but it can still happen. That doesn't mean you ban it for everybody. Just because one person regrets their hip replacement, which, by the way, once again, is a higher rate of regret than gender-affirming care, should nobody be allowed to get a fucking hip replacement? Should all the people who have positive and non-regretful experiences with their hip replacement get them yanked out of their fucking leg? I don't think so. I think that's quite dumb, actually. Alex was prescribed testosterone, she said, after one appointment with Dr. Lewis. Quote, there was no actual speaking to a psychiatrist or another therapist or even a caseworker, she wrote on Reddit. What do you mean a caseworker? How do you not have a caseworker? So this is likely a staffing issue. Why the fuck wouldn't she go through like Jamie Reed, who is the case manager and the bookkeeper at this place, who is knowledgeable enough of this account, if she is involved in the red flag list, which it's part of this article. I don't know if it directly is, or if this is an independent one, so it might not be. I don't know if Jamie Reed had any knowledge of this. But why didn't she go through somebody in Jamie Reed's position, the bookkeeper, the caseworker? If it's the case that that didn't happen, it might be because there is a shortage of workers, which the article has literally said, people at the clinic said there was. If you address the shortage, is no longer a problem. Wow, woohoo. After 3 years on the hormone, she realized she was non-binary and told the clinic she was stopping her testosterone injections. So she's not even not trans anymore, right? She's just not trans-masculine anymore. And this is semantic. If you're non-binary and you don't identify as trans, I don't give a shit, do you? However, definitionally speaking, to be transgender is simply to identify as a gender that you were not assigned at birth. Unless you were assigned non-binary at birth, you are by definition transgender. Words have definitions, words have meanings, right? To be cisgender means you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. You're born a boy, you stay a boy, yada, yada, yada. So she's still trans. And, like, if she doesn't identify as trans, that's completely valid. But it's possible that she might just want different care now. And if she is detransitioning, she's likely going to need different care now. Like, I don't know. We're splitting hairs. The nurse was dismissive, she recalled, and said there was no need for any follow-up. So that's fucked up. And once again, this would likely be helped with more staffing and more educated staffing, not a reduction of care. Alex now 20... Okay, this is good. I forgot this when I read it earlier. Alex, now 21, does not exactly regret taking testosterone, she told the Times. Oh, well. Problem solved. Because it helped her sort out her identity, but, quote, overall, there was a major lack of care and consideration for me, she said, which is not the case for literally everybody. This is a single citation from a single person. So it's fine to bring up people who have detransitioned, because I don't disagree that they exist, though I disagree that they exist in the numbers that people on the right falsely suggest, because studies have shown they don't. And I want people who have detransitioned to get the care they need, which is why an expansion of trans healthcare would help them. That's why I advocate for it. Not only just to help trans people, but why are we focusing on this like this is like a major plank of the other side of the battle of this, politicized issue, without even mentioning who politicized it to begin with, which would be the right wing, conservatives, Republican Party. Motherfuckers didn't care about this shit 5 years ago. The number of people who detransition or discontinue gender treatment is not precisely known. However, it's incredibly small for the studies we have. Small studies with differing definitions and methodologies have found rates ranging from 2 to 30%. In a new unpublished survey of more than 700 young people who had medically transitioned, Canadian researchers found that 16% stopped taking hormones or tried to reverse their effects after 5 years. Survey responders reported a variety of reasons, including health concerns, valid, a lack of social support, valid, and changes in gender identity, valid. However, this one is probably pretty big, because the other studies that we've seen on this issue indicate that it might be because of this one thing here. Now, there are going to be health concerns that present themselves to you after you've been on hormones for long enough, etc., but usually you tackle those if you're fine being trans continuing on. So potentially, if you are a trans feminine person, you're assigned male at birth, if you go on estrogen, you will start to develop breasts. And at that point, your risk for breast cancer goes up around the same risk level for cisgender women, people who are assigned female at birth, because now you got titties and the mammaries have developed past what they would be if you weren't on estrogen. So there are new health concerns that come up, but if you still understand yourself to be trans, you just take that L and get mammograms. And it's not to say that, if you're a AMAB person, not on estrogen, like people who typically identify as men can still get breast cancer. It's just not as common because they have less of the breasts, This shit has an agenda baked into it? Oh, absolutely. I've been through that. If you just got here, then, you've missed a lot of my speech about it. Ah, yes. Okay, so the actual problem at hand here comes in more than halfway through this long-ass article that was front-loaded with a bunch of bullshit that wasn't directly relevant and also painted it in a light that suggested that people in the right wing who want to ban care actually have an argument when they don't. Very cool. Because this is actually the root of a variety of problems, Not even in trans healthcare, but in all healthcare. Shortages of labor, shortages of doctors, because it is expensive to become a doctor, because it's a lot of work to become a doctor, because of a lot of doctors, especially in specialized fields, don't get paid enough to be able to pay off their student loans or live comfortably. Also have to work insane hours. It's a very grueling job for a lot of people. We saw this during the COVID epidemic and all the horror stories from a variety of clinics who had to triage in the fucking parking lot. So, like, the actual problem here, which is not a problem unique to this care, could solve so many of the concerns that are brought up in this article, but it comes up more than halfway in, after all this information, way past the point that the normal person reading this article will have read to. Or a person who has an interest in this topic in either direction will have read to, right? Motherfuckers don't read articles, they read headlines. And maybe the first paragraph. Forlorn says, quote, so this is from the 30% article, or the study that they mentioned. From Forlorn, quote, important limitations of this study were that it was unable to assess the reasons why 30% of their sample discontinued hormonal therapy for more than 90 days, the short period of 90 days, and the inability to capture prescriptions filled outside of the military healthcare system. It would be interesting to know what proportion discontinued due to detransition versus other reasons such as adverse effect of medication or cost. From the study itself, man, I love citing studies suggesting that, oh, well, this thing might be happening. And then when you read the study, the people who actually conducted the study were like, oh, actually, that's not the case. And it might be the fact that this might be one of the big ones. And also medication cost, lack of access to care. So I've already gone over how it's disastrously overwhelmed. I don't need this dog shit article to tell me how overwhelmed it is. I know it is. But there's a section here called political agendas way at the end. I don't know if this is like a tongue-in-cheek joke. I don't know if this is like a goof or a gaffe. I don't know if you would like this information, but political agendas, you say? How curious. By the end of the last year, Republican lawmakers in Missouri had turned gender care for minors into a rallying cry. They are the only side of the political aisle that has done this, and the other side of the political aisle has only operated in self-defense and defense of trans youth and trans people broadly, and queer people broadly. And Miss Reed, formerly a staunch defender of the affirming model, had become openly skeptical of it, raising concerns in internal emails and in meetings despite warnings from higher-ups. Her performance review in 2022 stated that she, quote, responds poorly to direction from management with defensiveness and hostility. In November, she left the gender clinic and started a new role at the university coordinating pediatric cancer research. And God willing, she's actually doing good work there and isn't trying to stop kids from getting that necessary medical care like she is currently with the trans care. Mrs. Hammond raised doubts as well, according to text messages and emails provided by Miss Reed. In January of this year, she emailed an administrator to explain why she did not want a management role at the center. Quote, you know, I have struggled with ethical dilemmas about how we do things for quite some time, Ms. Hammond said. So a lot of this, once again, seems to be symptomatic of a lack of staff. It's probably a lot of fucking work, which is why people slip through the cracks. So if we had more people who were educated and more doctors who were working, we would have less problem. Maybe if I space my words out like that, it'll get through to some people that it hasn't currently. That month, Miss Reed obtained a prominent parental rights lawyer. Love to classify this person that way when there's a follow-up to this that kind of makes it so that you wouldn't really want to call her that. Like, prominent in what way, perhaps? Bernadette Broyle. Shortly thereafter, she filed her complaint with the state and publicized her allegations in an essay that were both coordinated in timing in the Free Press, which is a rag. Miss Broyles is a vocal proponent of gender treatment bans for minors and has said the, quote, transgender movement poses a, quote, existential threat to our culture. This is a person with a political agenda. Culture is political. We're talking about medical and scientific treatment here, not culture. This is very obviously a person with a political agenda, and not someone I would describe as a so-called prominent parental rights lawyer. Prominent for being dog shit, maybe. Prominent for being a political operative and activist who's trying to help legislate from the bench, maybe. Miss Reed said that she supported the rights of transgender adults like her husband, just not youth, and following the standards of care, of course, and that Miss Broyles was the only lawyer who would take her case pro bono, because why the fuck would anybody if your shit is literally built on a foundation of silly putty? Still, Miss Reed does not deny that her views have hardened and become political. Quote, I support a national moratorium on the medicalization of kids, she said. It was always political for her. Maybe not when she first started working there, but when eventually she found out that she could thrust her name into the political spotlight because it is a major violent political movement on the right to be anti-trans and ban this care, she found out a way that she could make a little bit of pocket change and get her name out there and get some fame and fortune, maybe. That's my speculation. I believe that is the case, and I would be shocked if it wasn't. One parent said that, perhaps in pursuit of this political aim, Miss Reed had misrepresented her child's experience because a lot of her recollection, Miss Reed's that is, was contradicted by the parents and the client and the patients, the kids and the clinicians and medical and scientific consensus. Miss Reed's affidavit describes a patient whose liver was damaged after taking bicalutamide, a drug that blocks testosterone. This is usually used as a puberty blocker, is my understanding, or is used in conjunction with a lot of youth trans care, but as far as I'm aware, you can also take it as a testosterone blocker, as an androgen blocker for trans femme care. A drug that blocks testosterone. It makes specific claim about what a parent had written to the child's doctors. Quote, the parent said they were not the type to sue, but, quote, this could be a huge PR problem for you. So it is the case that a doctor should tell you that bicalutamide is linked to a potential increase in toxic liver, right? Or liver toxicity that can be problematic. However, usually what you do in order to prevent this is have regular screenings to measure what your liver's up to. And if it starts to get bad, you address that at that point. So, say it with me, everybody, an expansion of care would allow for this person on bicalutamide to get those screenings, especially if it's not at cost out of pocket, and would prevent any negative outcomes from the use of the drug. Wow. But blocking it instead would not. The parent, Heidi, a data scientist in the St. Louis area who requested anonymity because of privacy concerns, I assume this is a pseudonym, said she was stunned to read this, quote, twisted description of her teenage daughter's case. Heidi's daughter indeed had liver damage, a rare side effect of bicalutamide. Rare side effect, thank you. But she had been taking the drug for a year, records show, and had a complicated medical history. She was immunocompromised and experienced liver problems only after getting COVID and taking another drug with possible liver side effects. So it's not even the bicalutamide itself. It's not even the fucking trans care itself. It's other comorbidities that are not related to the gender-affirming care that in a better medical system would have been better understood. Brother, what the fuck? This person, Azin Goriyashi, quit your fucking job. I could literally do your job better than you, and I am talking shit on YouTube and Twitch.tv, premier video game streaming platform. Please quit your job. What the fuck are you doing? Do people go to school for journalism? I seem to remember that to be the case. Maybe that's one of the only, the few, the proud, frivolous degrees out there. Jesus Christ. In a message to doctors that was shared with the Times, Heidi actually wrote, quote, in our world, it's like a PR nightmare, referring to tensions in her family about the gender treatments. The message did not mention anything about suing the clinic. To the contrary, it said, quote, we don't regret any decision. It's just knowing liars. Literally, we've got two sides to the issue. I'm the New York Times. We got two sides to this issue, and it's both sides of the political conversation here. We got the one side that wants to ban all trans care and eradicate trans people from public life, and on the other side, we're following reality and scientific and medical consensus on the standards of care on an issue, and want to expand care so that it provides better outcomes for people. And we're going to write an article that seems to provide cover for people on the right who want to ban all trans care. And then later on, we're going to literally just cite two knowing liars who we debunk in our own fucking article about it. What was the point of writing this article? There was no point. There was nothing. Like, you're literally like, okay, here's these two knowing liars. Here's these two knowing misrepresenters or stretchers of the truth. And we're going to prop them up as if they have literally any reason to be speaking on this issue. I'm lost for word. It boggles the mind. Not only does it boggle the mind, it bottles it. It bottles it and it keeps you from being able to use it. Because what the fuck is going on here? Miss Reed said that she learned about the case from Miss Hammond, who helped compile examples for the affidavit, and that she regretted citing the case when she had not seen the medical record. So because of her own fucking negligence, we're even talking about this when there's no fucking reason to be. Why? This is shocking information. What the fuck? Thank you, New York Times, for putting this information at the literal end of your article. Like, these people are obviously not serious actors. You can't take their shit for a grain of salt. In fact, they should have been fired a long time ago, clearly. They're keeping medical records for their own personal fucking use. Pretty sure you're not allowed to do that. US media is such a joke. Well, I have bad news for you, because media all over the world is a fucking joke, brother. There are some gems out there, though. Like me. And only me. Quote, my daughter's situation was exploited, Heidi said, noting that the hospital told her that her records would be shared with the state. So how about we put this information literally at the front of the article, New York Times? Do you think this might be something your readers would want to know as soon as possible? Rather than reading through the 8 billion words that is this article that we've read through in this fucking YouTube video that is now 2 hours long, unedited? Do you think you might want to put that closer to the top? Either you are the most negligent and incompetent journalistic entity possible, which I don't think is true because Fox News exists, or you are malicious and have a political agenda that is anti-trans. Those are the two options left, because your own article has only provided those two options. They haven't provided the secret third thing, which is they have actual serious concerns on either side, because clearly they do not. They're citing people who they know are liars, who stretch the truth, and who don't know what they're talking about, and they hide all the information about it later on in the article. Some families are not waiting for the legal proceedings to play out. Jennifer Harris Dalt, a Mennonite pastor, moved her family from St. Louis to New York in July to ensure that her 8-year-old transgender daughter could get gender treatments from when she nears puberty. A fucking pastor, dude. A pastor. One of these, God bless the body, the soul of Jesus Christ. Hallowed be I don't know what Mennonite shit is. They might not believe in, I don't know what the fuck religion is. It's all made up. The points don't matter. That's a reference for my boomers out there. But a fucking pastor is willing to actually be smart about this when you would expect the alternative because of a lot of popular religious people in our society. Come on. Mennonites are super conservative traditionalists, and this one isn't stupid. Well, that's cool. Diamond in the rough. Quote, the more I see coming out of Missouri, the more I know we made the decision that was right for us, she said. And now with the ban on trans care in effect in Missouri, is my understanding as of time of filming, it was a good move, clearly, and this is why it's happening in this country. There is literally an internal refugee crisis happening in this country of people, adults, and parents of youth who are seeking gender-affirming care, who are having it banned, and that's leading to their lessening of their quality of life, the worsening of their mental health symptoms, the likely increasing of their suicidality, and the only better option there is to uproot your entire fucking life, move away from your family, your friends, your local community, the people that you have literally fucking built roots to be in and are likely happy to be in order to allow your child to have a good life, which is what every fucking parent should want for their kid. The goal of being a parent is to provide your child the best possible life that you can, not to use your life as a political project, likely as a person who is a parent yourself, to stop children from getting necessary medical care. That is something some would say evil people would do. Demons might do, in fact, should they exist. And should they walk among us. The Attorney General's investigation into the clinic's practices is ongoing and also completely bullshit, by the way. If any of the medical consensus and scientific consensus on the issue, and if this article we just read is anything to go by, this Attorney General, this right-wing conservative, politically motivated Attorney General's investigation into the clinic, this investigation is going to turn up nothing. It's going to turn up dog shit, and it's not going to turn up a justification to fucking ban the care, but the care is now banned for the youth in Missouri. While several families said they blamed Miss Reed for the political fallout, others said the university bears responsibility too. For decades, Dr. John Daniels was the sole endocrinologist in St. Louis prescribing hormones to transgender adults. He did so, he said, because he saw profound benefits in his patients and because, as a gay man, he appreciated the diversity of the human experience. And also, this is not a problem, this is a symptom of a problem. You get me? I don't have to say it again. If he's the only doctor for decades who is the sole endocrinologist prescribing hormones to trans adults, that is a staffing issue. That is a lack of research and investigation issue. That is not a care issue. Those things can be fixed without the banning of care. When Miss Reed's allegations came out, he was shocked and emailed her to ask her if she ever reported concerns to Washington University. She replied that she had, but was ignored. Quote, I hate that the politicians have gotten involved with this, but I do have great concerns about how adolescents and pre-adolescents are being treated. Dr. Daniels wrote, quote, that the higher-ups at WU don't take you seriously is now on them. Yeah, this is a problem that can be fixed, but it's not fixed by banning fucking care. Also, apparently there was a correction. A correction was made on August 23, 2023. An earlier version of this article referred incorrectly to Dr. Katie Hayden Roots' work with patients at the clinic. After reviewing her records after publication, Dr. Hayden Roots said she had worked with or supervised the counseling of roughly 30 patients. She did not counsel 50. Wow. So, the New York Times is dog shit. It's a dog shit platform. They're pandering to a right-wing audience because that's what a lot of people in the media sphere are doing. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's because they understand that it's easier to whip right-wingers up into a frenzy about shit that isn't actually happening, allow them to deny reality, and also profit off of it by drawing their eyeballs through fear, anger, and disgust to your publication in order to get more ad revenue and potential subscriber benefit. The problem with that idea for the New York Times and even CNN, as we're seeing, is that the right wing has had a constant political project to demonize the Washington Post, and the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, whatever, as being fucking communist, Maoist, leftist, neo-Marxist propaganda since the dawn of fucking time. Why would they ever start taking a publication seriously because you throw them a little red meat? It's a fool's bargain because you're bargaining with fools. There's no reason for this. This article is dog shit. Azine Goriashi should be fucking ashamed and should be seen as bringing great shame to the profession of journalism. And this article should be deleted with a massive fucking redaction of all this garbage information and with all the information that they put later on in the fucking article in the front after reframing it as being a pro-trans healthcare article, because that's what it is if you read past the bullshit political engineering. opinion pieces don't fucking matter, in the sense that it being an opinion piece doesn't fucking matter to the broader public, because opinion pieces are still citing in the fucking passage of legislation. I know you're saying that because you don't like them, but I'm just fucking mad. Anyway, the New York Times has literally been cited. Articles that the New York Times have written that have been bad articles, that have not had actually the correct information or any ounce of journalistic integrity applied to them, have actually been cited as justification in arguments by lawmakers to ban gender-affirming care. Like, this shit is genuinely harmful, which is why that Onion article that said, you know, it is journalism's sacred duty to endanger the lives of as many trans people as possible is actually not a satirical article, because that's what they're fucking doing. Anyway, be safe out there, be good, have fun, be nice. Hope you enjoyed and got some, what is it, catharsis? Schadenfreude, or whatever the fuck, Freudy is when somebody has something bad happen to them and you derive pleasure from it, which is different from sadism, which is ideally a consensual. Anyway, hope you had a good time, and sub to the channel, and sorry my post-viral cough hasn't gone away after a month. It's likely to stay for longer. And it's harder for me to do streams, which means it's harder for me to do videos. So, sorry about that. Have a good one.